go ahead and share the presentation. So let me go ahead and do that.
Quickly, is Raul CAC member? I see him as an attendee asking to be promoted.
Yeah, Raul Jain is with DDOT. If somebody is able to promote him, that would be.
Yeah, he'll need to be promoted. It looks like. Yes.
Okay. So thanks. I'll go ahead and get started. Just some quick housekeeping items, and then we'll jump right in. We're here for a Community Advisory Committee or CAC meeting for the Connecticut Avenue Multimodal Safety Improvement Project. So this is a virtual meeting. We'll just go through some basic functions. If you are, and this applies to CAC members and members of the public, if you are having issues or you need technical support, you can call 202-997-8354 to get assistance with connecting. CAC members will be able to mute and unmute themselves. Everyone else cannot unmute themselves or share video, but CAC members can share video. If anybody needs a closed caption feature, that is available as well. If you have a question during presentation, you can send it via the Q&A feature. And that's how that works. There is a 3-dot icon, and then you look for Q&A, and then you type in your question, and then select all panelists, and we'll review those. I know we have a lot of members of the public on this meeting, so if we are unable to get to your question during the meeting, we'll follow up with you after the meeting with that. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and give you the quick agenda for the meeting today, and then we will, I'll turn it over to Sandra to run through the presentation. We went through a round of introductions. We're going to present a reduced project scope from when we met with you in June, and Sandra will go through that. And then we'll talk through some next steps, and then we'll open it up to questions from the CAC. So Sandra, the floor is yours. Sandra?
Yes, sorry. You'd think by now I would have remembered to unmute myself. Apologies. So again, I'm Sandra Marks, Chief Transportation Planner for the District Department of Transportation. As Ted said, the last time we met, we had a CAC meeting and a public meeting back in June. And at that time, we presented a different concept from what had been out in the public previously. We got lots of feedback. And since then, we wanted to just get everyone up to speed on where we are and what we've been doing in the meantime. So we wanted to bring back the CAC to provide an update and let you know where we are and where the project is going from here. So in the FY 2025 budget that was passed by Council, the funding for the Connecticut Avenue project was scaled back significantly, and the scope of the project, of course, had to be adjusted. We want to talk through that with you tonight. So those of you that have taken a look at the budget, the approved budget, you'll see that there's about $6 million, which is significantly reduced from the previous estimates for the project. And that is spread out over FY 25, which is the fiscal year that began in October this month, and FY 26. What were the assumptions that kind of were necessitated by that significant reduction are that we will change our focus from a corridor-wide project to a more scaled back and spot improvement project. Because we will not be doing a corridor-wide project, the existing conditions on Connecticut Avenue will remain. So that means that we will have peak hour parking. We will not be able to do left turn pockets, which we showed in the last concept, because unless we do that for the whole corridor, we don't have the ability to do that on a intersection by intersection approach. So we're going to walk through some of the things that we're going to be advancing, and we also, since June, we went back and we looked at crash data and updated that to include as much of the 2024 data that we have, and Laura will talk about that in a couple of minutes to show you what we learned there. So on the next slide, just helping you understand a little bit about how we're going to take that money and consider where we can invest. So we're going to be looking at the crash history, which has been updated, as I mentioned. We'll talk about that in a minute. When we met in June, we identified or talked about a number of uncontrolled pedestrian crossings, primarily on the northern end of the corridor. And we have some updated information and recommendations for those. We will also be looking at opportunities to upgrade intersection geometry. There are a couple of skewed intersections and slip lanes that we might be able to redesign to improve pedestrian and vehicular and safety for all users. And then there's a number of opportunities to improve intersection sightline obstructions. The picture that we have up here is actually something that was flagged by a member of the community. This is an example where the bus stop and some of the infrastructure is actually limiting the ability to see vehicles that are coming around the corner. So we're going to look at some of those opportunities and see if we will be able to make some improvements there as well. I'm going to turn it over to Laura just to talk a little bit about the analysis and the update of the crash data that we've done since the original study. And that'll be on the next slide, and then we'll talk a little bit more about where we go from here.
Thank you, Sandra. Okay, so I think the next slide would be great, Ted, or whoever's doing that. Yeah, perfect. So yeah, as Sandra noted, the project team, we performed an updated review of the crash history to supplement the original analysis that was completed for crashes through 2019 at the earliest stage of this project study. With the changes to the corridor since that time, including the elimination of the reversible lanes and the reduced speed limit, we wanted to see how the crash experience has been affected by those changes. And briefly in June, we sort of shared some of that with you at that prior CAC meeting, where we had noted that we've observed a notable decline in crashes overall, more than 40%, since the removal of the reversible lanes, and a shift in the type of crash, along with a reduction in injuries, fatalities, bicycle, pedestrian, and bike crashes. So all of that went down when the reversible lanes came out and the speed limit was decreased. So that's all good news. But now our more detailed review since that time, when we spoke with you in June, was really intersection by intersection to hone in really on those locations which still warrant additional interventions to improve safety even further. And really, we're looking at a few things for that. Still, looking at the frequency of crashes occurring, the severity of those crashes, and the vulnerable users involved. And then really diagnosing what's happening there. Can we do something to improve the situation with a design-related approach? So when we did that, we found that really most of the intersections that have historically experienced relatively higher crash rate, they generally remained the same even after the reversible lanes came out. So overall crashes went down, but the ones that are still having the relatively higher level of crashes are pretty much the same intersections as before. That map kind of shows little crash clusters in the blue, the blue shapes kind of shows where those crashes historically are occurring more frequently. So with that all being said, we've used this more intersection by intersection review to then isolate those key locations that really need us to look at and look at those improvements that can be made. So next slide. This will show the list of locations. So on the left-hand side is a list of the higher crash location intersections. One of them is actually an intersection, we call it the zoo area, which encompasses Devonshire Place and Hawthorne and the crosswalk at the zoo. But anyway, these are the locations that are still seeing, relatively higher crashes than other locations. Those will become the focus. And again, this is January 2020 through through middle of 2024. It's sorted, as you can see, that left-hand table by the higher number of crashes first up top, and then, moving downward. And also, going to full, there you go. Also in the table, you can see we've captured, how many vulnerable users, which means pedestrians, cyclists, non-motorized individuals, have been involved in those crashes, and then also the injury, serious injury and fatalities. So that list really informs where we're going to look at spot safety improvements. And on the right is the list of automatic locations for review, and those are the 6 intersections that do not have a signal, so they're uncontrolled crossings of Connecticut Avenue. And so yes, they're all of those locations are automatically reviewed in this new spot improvement program. I think we can go to the next slide. This shows what are we going to look at doing, and we're thinking, obviously have to think about budget and what can be done feasibly within that budget. So we do have some things in our toolbox that will fit within the budget and the scope that is before us here, and our goal obviously is to improve safety. So that's what we're looking at doing. At the signals, we're looking into changes to the signal timing and phasing, especially with respect to pedestrian crossing phases. We'll also review visibility of signal heads and look at relocating poles where that is warranted. We're looking at geometry improvements as well for locations that have been particularly challenging for safety. And this may include removal or narrowing of the separate slip lanes, tightening the turning radii to slow down turning vehicles, or even reducing the skew angle of the intersecting cross street. We also are going to consider curb extensions on the side streets, but we can't do anything of that nature on Connecticut Avenue due to the overarching need, as Sandra mentioned, that we're going to be keeping the six lane section curb to curb. So, but for any cross streets that curb extensions or narrowing would be helpful. That's certainly on the table. Bus stops may be consolidated or relocated. We're doing so would promote better visibility of pedestrians and bikers, or would create a safer operation overall at the intersection. And finally, signage is under a very detailed review with the goal of reducing sign clutter, improving clarity, updating to current standards, and providing clear messaging. Additional turn lane restrictions may be added, and lane hardening, such as the photo that you see on the slide there, will be added in select locations to encourage slower travel speeds. Sandra, I think back to you for some of the other improvements to the non-signalized intersections.
Yep, great. Thank you, Laura. And just a reminder to our panelists, if you're just to keep yourselves muted so we don't have some of the background noise. Okay, so on the next slide, what I just wanted to talk for a minute about the unsignalized intersections, as we mentioned earlier. These are on the north. The left is the north side of the corridor. We looked at Chesapeake, Harrison, Ingomar, Jocelyn, Kanawha, and Legation, and I'm sure I said some of those incorrectly. So with any signalization, we do an extensive study to collect data, understand how many vehicles, how many people are crossing, how many bicyclists, how many heavy vehicles are going through those intersections to determine what is the appropriate treatment. We have done an initial analysis, and what that has shown is that Chesapeake is actually, we're going to be looking at a full signal. So that's not a hawk, not a pedestrian, but just a regular, fully activated traffic signal. And what we saw with the information and the data at Legation is that will be recommended for a hawk signal, which is the three-headed signal that's dark unless it's activated, then it goes to flashing red, solid red to allow the pedestrians to cross, and then it goes back to a free flow condition. The others did not meet the what we call the warrants for signalized treatment, but we do want to make sure that we are making those as safe as possible, and we're going to be looking at some other high visibility signage and some other options that we can do to highlight those crossings. And as we mentioned at our last meeting, we really want to concentrate the crossings where they are the safest. And we have two that at Kanawha and Ingomar, probably the two that I did not say correctly. And those we'll be looking at potentially removing so that we can focus pedestrian crossings at the locations where they are safest. We're going to be doing some follow-up study, and the timing for design and implementation is usually a 12+ month time horizon. We'll have more information as we get into the next stages. And that will also be where we spend the bulk of our budget for FY25. The next slide shows just a couple of examples. I'm sure you've seen them around the district, different types of high visibility signs, flashing beacons. And there's a number of different opportunities and options that we will be looking at to recommend for the intersections that are uncontrolled but are not going to be slated for a signal or a hawk. We're also going to be looking, in addition to the signage, at the sight lines and the visibility. Obviously, that's going to be even more critical where there's not a signalized, it's not a signalized intersection, to make sure that pedestrians are as visible as possible and as safe as possible as they cross Connecticut Avenue. So I wanted to just, on the next slide, that's sort of where we are. So we are advancing. We have data that is allowing us to move forward on the unsignalized intersections. That's going to be kind of our first tranche of effort. We are going to be taking that prioritized list. I guess it's not prioritized, but the list of the ranked list of intersections by severity of crashes, and as you would imagine, focusing on the more severe intersections where we're seeing more crashes, to identify a number of recommended improvements. The scale of those will range, as we discussed, from small scale traffic signal modifications that in some ways will improve safety but won't be a big visible change to the to those that are traveling through that intersection. You won't notice big medians or big new infrastructure, but we're going to be looking at optimizing the signal operations to improve pedestrian crossing times, and to, if we can, get some left turn phases in to improve the safety depending on the intersection. So, and Ted, if you could go to the next slide, we wanted to just talk about where do we go from here? So as we've mentioned, the scope of the project has changed significantly due to the reduced budget. We're going to be advancing the signal design and moving those through the design and implementation phases. As with any of our projects that we do in the district, we have required outreach, which we'll talk about on the next slide, and we will follow obviously that format. Because the CAC was established, we established them generally for large capital corridor projects, and this project is no longer a large capital corridor project. We're going to be transitioning to our smaller scale spot improvement outreach process. So any improvement that we do that impacts traffic operations or parking or the physical infrastructure of the roadways, we have a required notice of intent. We call it an NOI process. That is an opportunity to notify the community of a change to some of the traffic operations or parking regulations. And that is also an opportunity for ANCs to weigh in and provide formal comments, as well as the general community to provide some comments. And depending on what those comments are, we can adjust the project or make some changes. But that's sort of the formal avenue that we use to notify the community for this scale of project. We will compile a list of we use the ANCs as our kind of first point of contact. That's our formal notification. But we also alert some of the council member's office and other stakeholders. So there is a broader opportunity. They're always posted on our website. And depending on what the recommendations are in a particular intersection, we'll determine if there is some additional outreach that is necessary. If we're doing a geometric change to some of the intersections that we will be looking at, that might warrant something more extensive than if we are changing signal timing or something, a smaller footprint of an improvement. So we wanted to kind of bring the CAC back together so that you all know what we've been doing since June. We've done a lot of work looking at crunching the numbers on the crash data and analyzing the uncontrolled signals to determine what are the next best steps over there. And what we wanted to do is have an opportunity to share the approach that we're using moving forward and how you can stay in touch with us and how we'll be notifying. So I'm going to stop there. Ted, if I forgot anything critical, please jump in. But I think now is the time that we can open up for CAC questions.
Yeah.
And that'll be done. People can unmute themselves or raise their hand. How do you want to do that?
Yeah, I mean, CAC members should be able to unmute themselves. I think just for order, if you wouldn't mind raising your hand so that we can, I mean, if you want to jump in, but I think it'd be most helpful if you can raise your hand so that we can kind of get that orderly. But if anybody has a question, feel free to go for it.
Hey, Ted, just an FYI, I am a panelist and it's saying I can't raise my hand, and it says
Okay.
participants cannot raise their hand in this webinar, so that might not work as well.
Okay, then I guess we'll just jump in, and I can keep a list of who has questions, but if anybody wants to go first.
I have one.
I also can't chat anymore. I don't know, like we can't respond to people in the chat. I was just trying to type something in and I've been disabled from that. This is Courtney. I'm a
So if you're just what I've learned is that if you're trying to respond to somebody directly, you have to highlight them, and then you should see on the bottom your ability to. Okay. Okay, Ted, do you want to?
Sorry, Janelle.
Keep track.
I did actually have a question too, if.
Sure.
Okay, so when you showed the rankings of the intersections, what is the reason that you do the ranking by the number of crashes versus the number of vulnerable users affected and or fatalities and serious injuries? Because I would think that you'd want to rank it by the vulnerable users and or fatalities, serious injuries versus like fender benders. Does that,
Yeah.
I'm just
So that's
curious.
a great question, and we spared you from the 14 different versions of how we could rank them. There was we had lots of discussions about what was the best way to show. We had them ranked by just number. We had them prioritized by, as you're saying, severity, the crash rate that we and those of you who are data and numbers wonks, we can absolutely share all of the different analyses that were done. What we did find was that the top cluster was pretty consistent. So when we did it by vulnerable user or by number or by some of these others, sort of the top half was still the top half and the bottom half was the bottom half. But when we do the more detailed, and I'll let Laura correct me or jump in if I misspeak, when they do the detailed analysis, they're going to look at not only the number of crashes, the type of crashes, and if you recall from the last presentation, we talked a little bit about left hand versus side swipe, and the treatments for addressing those issues will be different. So they're going to do a deep dive into the types of crashes, with obviously a focus on vulnerable users is going to be one of the most important things that we look at. But that's a great question, and there's like 15 different versions of this table, but the top was pretty consistent and the bottom was pretty consistent. So we felt this was kind of illustrative of how those intersections fell out. But great question.
Great, thank you. And just to follow on that, just I would strongly recommend not just looking at like the numbers and the data and like the side swipes and whatever. Like when you're looking at Cathedral, there was 17 total crashes over 4.5 years, but 6 were vulnerable users affected and 3 were fatalities and serious injuries. Well, that kind of falls into that zoo area and should ladder up. And when looking at the people who are using the sidewalks and intersections and crosswalks in that area are going to be people with strollers, people with mobility devices, like all of that, and you're seeing that heavy use of people outside of car. Like I think that needs to be a qualitative and not quantitative analysis in this overall looking at the avenue exercise.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
Cool. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Hi there. Is it okay if I go next?
Sure.
Hi. Great. Josh Rising. Didn't get the chance to introduce myself at the very beginning, but great to be here. So had just kind of a few questions. First, there have been a couple things on this in the chat. I was hoping you could talk just a little bit more about the decision to remove crosswalks, which seems totally crazy that in 2024 we're making it more difficult for pedestrians to cross roads. I mean, my expectation is that people are still going to be crossing anyway, but now it's going to be more dangerous because there's no crosswalk there. My understanding is they still legally have the, cars need to stop for them, but without a crosswalk, motorists are going to be less likely to do that. Could you talk any more about any data that you're using, kind of that would make us more comfortable that this will be safer as opposed to increasing risk for pedestrians?
And Josh, I just want to add on to that. One of those crosswalks is right next to a very large apartment complex, and the other one is right next to a school. So neither of those really seem like low traffic, foot traffic areas, right? As well.
Totally.
Yeah, thank you for that. And what I'll start off, and then I'll ask Laura to jump in because her team has looked, really spent a lot of time with the numbers and what we're seeing out there, and can talk more about how we got to that decision. So look, what I'll say is a couple of things. There's no right answer, and you're correct that every intersection is a legal crosswalk. The approach is to funnel and encourage pedestrians to use the safest intersection. So I live in a neighborhood further up 16th Street, and I've got little kids and I want them to cross where there's a signal, even though there are striped crosswalks, because they're uncontrolled. And so and I'll let Laura jump in a minute, but these are one block. So we're not asking people to go terribly out of the way. And I appreciate that for some people, one block is an additional burden. But the thought is to keep those pedestrian crossings and encourage and funnel them to the safest places to cross. And Laura, did you want to talk a little bit about what you saw in terms of the actual activity of where pedestrians were crossing from what the count data was telling us?
Yeah, I guess, it all depends on what day you go out and collect data. These were on the lower end of the spectrum in terms of daily crossings, certainly less than 10. But I think the real impetus for strongly considering removal was that in this particular run of Connecticut Avenue, that the blocks are very closely spaced. And so the resultant, block to block distance is about 200 feet. And it seemed like a viable idea to do exactly what Sandra mentioned, to encourage, crossing at those locations that are more centralized. It's not 100% a decided decision. I know several redundant phrasing there, but it's good to hear, the additional feedback today on us reiterating that. I think we had it on the list in June as well, as a potential for removal, and that's sort of been a status quo. I don't want to say that in a negative way, but it's remained as sort of the same. We haven't furthered it, or we haven't removed the idea either to date. But that was the rationale for that consideration.
Yeah, understand. I just think it's the wrong decision to prioritize drivers who don't live in this neighborhood over people who do and are kind of getting around by foot. All right, but anyway, we don't need to
Can I just interject also just for 1 second? Because like, if you're talking, Sandra talked about her kids. I mean, it's the vulnerable populations we're trying to serve here. I have the same situation with my kids, begging them to cross at the Ellicott Hawk light, which is questionably helpful because most people don't understand how to use it. But we need to look to the people who aren't paying attention, the kids who aren't going to listen to us. We need to protect them over speeding commuters. I mean, sometimes I am one of those people, but like, let's think about the people we need to think about here. Sorry, Josh, please.
100%. Thanks for the endorsement, Courtney. Okay, moving on. So second question I had was about slip lanes. There are a couple of slip lanes. There are many slip lanes on Connecticut. The couple that I'm most familiar with are in the Nebraska area. I know there have been previous discussions about the potential of removing slip lanes, which I think, as we all know, are an increased hazard as they allow vehicles to move at a more rapid speed and increase the number of crossings that pedestrians have to make. Any updates or thinking around removal of slip lanes as part of this project?
Yeah, we are still looking at those. What was interesting, you can see from, I can't tell, that slide's not up, but Nebraska is, for better or for worse, sort of in the middle of the pack. And so we want to make sure that the recommendations, we're going to come up with a list of recommendations. We could do this, we could do that. We've got some signal timing that might help here, slip lane at Nebraska, and then take a look at those as a menu and determine, okay, we've got X budget, where does that fall? But I think we're absolutely going to look at that. I think that we know that will help shorten pedestrian crossings and simplify those intersections. So it's absolutely still on the table. Just haven't determined yet.
Sounds great. And some of that, like the Nebraska Connecticut one, would have a larger price tag associated with it, but there are other slip lanes that would not necessarily.
Yep. Fessenden and some others. Yep, that's right.
Great. So the last question I had is, it was a little unclear from the presentation what feedback you're hoping for from the community. kind of as part of this? Are you looking for kind of help in prioritizing the intersections? Are you looking for thoughts on which of your tools to be using? It was kind of unclear what you're hoping to get out of this sort of community engagement process. So just wanted to kind of push you a little bit on that and see what you're hoping that that we can provide.
Sure. Yeah. So tonight was really just we haven't updated anyone. We haven't been back out to the CAC since June. So a lot has changed, as you can see, the budget being the biggest piece of that, and wanted to let you know what we've been doing since June and what our plan is moving forward. I'm not sure, feedback is great, but we're sort of not, the formal feedback will come when we have the NOI period. So for each of these, whatever the venue ends up being, so we know that we've got the hawk and the signal, that will be noticed to the community. That will be, you'll have an opportunity to weigh in on that. Tonight, I think we just wanted to share where we are, honestly. And I know that there are probably some intersections that are there's more passion around, and that's helpful for us as we go through. We're gonna, like I said, we're gonna have a menu of 6 or 8 recommendations that will all have a price tag, and we will have to kind of use the budget that we've got and see how far down the list we can get. But if there are particular locations that are, most critical, certainly heard the zoo. We know that there's some obvious ones that have seen, Ordway's got the highest number on here by most and vulnerable users, so kind of floats to the top in many ways. But I think we wanted to just come back out and share where we are and where we're going next.
Okay, I've been trying to talk for a while, but you can't raise your hand with this. I've been raising my hand. So is it all right if I ask some questions now?
Sure.
Yeah, and then we'll go to.
Right, I have one. I want to start with you asked for specific locations, and I want to call your attention to the intersection at McKinley Street. That has 6 vulnerable users affected, which is near the top. I heard nothing about any efforts to improve McKinley. We did a safety survey that Josh actually led up in ANC 34G. That intersection rose to the top as far as people's fears and concerns about it. And then another reason for you to do something there is, you may be aware, DDOT is proposing rerouting the E4. Which would now come up Connecticut and turn left at McKinley, which I think is a very dangerous thing to do, but that's what WMATA is proposing to do. Similarly, on the return, the E4 would be turning left at Military. And so if they go through with this is going to be a hazard for the buses, for cars, and pedestrians. Are you proposing a left turn lane there? Are you proposing left turn lanes anywhere, I guess is another question I have. So
because we're not doing a corridor wide, we don't have the opportunity to do a left turn lane, because it would mean that you're you're going from 3 lanes in each direction to 2 and then back out to 3. And that's not, that introduces some additional safety concerns. So we don't have that as an option with this project.
Okay, and are you planning to do anything to improve the safety of McKinley and Connecticut?
Yeah, we're going to look at all of the intersections. So this is helpful, and I think you raised a really good point that WMATA is coming out with their Better Bus Network, the final plan. I believe it's either next week or the following week, and that'll be a really important input to understand where those changes are. So that's a helpful flag for us.
I have another couple of questions and comments. Just taking a step back, it is depressing and discouraging to me that pedestrian safety seems not to be a priority in what you're presenting to us. I agree with what Josh said about removing crossings is not helpful, because I think there are a lot of studies that show people just are always going to take the most direct route. And so I doubt that that's going to be a safety improvement. I had another question and suggestion. You were not so clear on what you're doing at Jocelyn and Harrison. You said you're going to make improvements. Are you considering raised pedestrian crosswalks there? I hope you are considering that, because that would be a great thing for pedestrians.
Yeah, so we have a toolbox that, based on the type of roadway, allows us to do different things. And Connecticut, as you know, is an evacuation route, is a response route, is a freight route. There's buses, and it's an arterial, I'm sorry. And on arterial roads, we don't allow vertical deflection. We know that that is a very effective speed mitigation, which is why you'll see them all over the city on lots of local streets and lower volume streets. But unfortunately, that's not an option for a street like Connecticut Avenue. But we will look at flashing, the push button that yield to pedestrians and much more visible treatments that we hope will make that a safer place to cross.
Yeah, I'm very sorry to hear that bad news. What do you mean by improving geometry for bicycle and pedestrian safety? Can you give me some specific examples of that, please?
Yeah, so one example, so if we have the optimum design for an intersection is 90 degrees, right? You come to the intersection, you make a 90-degree turn. Some of the intersections along the corridor, because Connecticut is a diagonal, are skewed. And so it's looking for opportunities to get those closer to 90-degree, which makes it safer and improves the visibility. So that's what we'll be looking at.
Okay, thanks. All right, I have a lot of other questions, but I don't want to hog all the time, so I'll stop there.
Can I do a quick follow-up, Jim, on the raised crosswalk and the slip lane sort of combo problem? So I understand, a raised crosswalk going across Connecticut is out for the reason that you just said. That makes sense. But on the unsignalized intersections, especially those that have a slip lane, like Chevy Chase Parkway and Harrison Street, a raised crosswalk going across the inbound street to Connecticut would be a good speed mitigant for people turning off of Connecticut. I mean, it's an unsignalized intersection, so it's not like they ever have a green light where they can just drive through it to the other side like you can at a signalized one, where, again, a raised crosswalk might not be appropriate. But that's just something to consider if, removal of a slip lane or a high geometry angle street crossing isn't possible because of the budgetary costs of that. Perhaps installing a raised crosswalk along Connecticut could be an option to mitigate the speed of turnoff traffic and conflicts there with pedestrians crossing.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that.
Good, Stephen. Yeah. Thank you.
And I think Courtney apologies for not having all of the functionality. If you are able to come off camera, that will help us know that that'll serve as your hand raise if you're able to do that. But I think, Courtney, did you?
Yeah, thank you.
have a
Stephen, I'm
follow-up?
so glad you brought up Chevy Chase Parkway, because that's a really dangerous intersection, and it would benefit from that. Like anything you could do, if you can figure out a way to make that more 90 degrees, that would be really helpful. Since I think budget seems paramount here, I just wanted to ask about something that actually ANC 3F has already requested. And ANC, our colleague, Zach Ferguson in 3-4G put forth a resolution as well on this, which is daylighting some intersections by removing some of the parking spaces on the cross streets closest to the intersection at Connecticut. I mean, we've asked for this because we've seen with the closing of Albemarle how, it's just the Wild West getting around, with commuters trying to get around the closure of Albemarle, and the backups are a lot. And so it's just been really clear how daylighting, which is free, could really improve some visibility, some pedestrian safety. And 3F has asked for it. I mean, it's so tempting to just try and put up a sign. I just don't understand why DDOT can't respond to some of these requests that are so basic, take basically no budget, and are so clearly a safety improvement. And I mean, again, like I know you talked about it on this nice slide, but like, why can't we just do that? Why can't you just do that?
Yeah, no, so it would be great. First of all, daylighting is absolutely on the list of tools, and you're right, it's one of the easiest things that we have in our toolbox. And if you want to follow up offline, you can email Ted, or I think I was copied on the same email, and just let me know where those locations are, and we can see how we can follow up on that.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks.
I kind of want to follow on to what Courtney was saying there too. I think the quick build stuff that you guys have in the toolbox that I saw at your recent meeting, one, does that need a notice of intent to daylight intersections, or can we just do it? Because people, and I mean like hardening what is probably already signed to be daylit, but people just will park there anyways because there's not a physical obstruction to prevent them from doing so.
Anytime we make changes to parking, we issue a notice of intent.
Right,
That's
but
part of the process for that.
we're not changing parking. We're just adding physical infrastructure to prevent the car from storing itself, the driver from storing the car where the car doesn't belong. Because that's a bit of the problem that we have down on Cathedral, right? Where it's just people can't see each other, and it's
Right.
because cars are parked where they're not supposed to park.
Right. Yeah, and that's exactly why we put the flex posts, and we have, if people, just signs are easier than flex
Not
posts.
going to keep people from that Starbucks,
Right.
Janelle.
No, I'm with
They
you. I'm
are
with you.
stopping, and now you've got DoorDash going there.
They can park there. They cannot park in the crosswalk, but that is a loading zone. But yeah.
Yeah.
It's Cathedral though.
So yes is the answer, right? That's we do the notice of intent in part because, we can never do enough notification. I'm sure you all can come up with 12 different times that something happened and you didn't know about it. So we try to err on the side of using the tools that we have, and which is why we do the notice of intent if we're daylighting an intersection, even if technically we may not, by the letter of the law, need to. That's part of our SOP for when we do those types of installations. I saw somebody else come on camera.
Yeah, it's Bob Dealing. It's Bob Dealing. Two quick comments and then a sort of a broad question. Thank you for this. I think all of these are safety improvements. I'd like to see more of it. It's great. A lot of it was, in the original study. Some of this is consistent with that. The other comment is I don't see a lot of multimodal promotion in this. So I think we all know that, but just wanted to observe that. So then my question is, if you had more money, what would you do next? And what's the longer term outlook here? Is there one? Is this the end? Is this the beginning of something different? What can we expect next?
Yeah, great question. So look, if we had more money, we would do all sorts of things. But because we can't do the whole core, I think from a safety perspective, for the left turns are one of the most challenging safety issues, and left turn pockets would help with that. We can't do that unless we're doing the whole corridor. We can't go from 5 lanes to 6 lanes to, we can't weave in and out. So I think, that's the first thing that comes to mind. If we were able to do that, I think that would be the best case scenario. But that's not the situation. And I don't know what the future is. The future is, you all have the ear and of the leadership and can advocate for funding. And we have, as I mentioned, I don't think I mentioned today, but definitely in June, we are beginning our strategic bikeways plan. And I was hoping that I would be able to share a public meeting date, but it hasn't been set yet. But, you know, we hope that you'll be engaged in that. We'll see what comes out of that as well. But I don't, you know, for now, there's not a major capital project on Connecticut Avenue. That's what I know. And then I see somebody else came on camera, and I apologize, I don't have your name. Oh, Pat.
Hi, Sandra. Thanks so much. So this is kind of a follow-up to Bob's point too, but you know, this has been going on for about 6 years since people started asking for this study and this project. The top priority when we were doing it was to reduce fatalities and serious injuries across all modes of traffic. I know we've reduced the speed limit, we've eliminated reversible lanes, but do you think, the $6 million is obviously a limiting factor. As you're thinking about how to spend that $6 million, are we keeping in mind not putting things in place that might prevent future improvements when perhaps more budget is available? Hardscapes and whether it's protected bike lanes, whether it is, left turn lanes and things like that. How much of an idea is that been getting into the planning in terms of potentially more money and candidly friendlier leadership for a project like that in the future?
Nothing that we're doing would preclude a future project. So we're not, it's similar to the left turn lanes where, because we can't do the whole corridor, we can't weave in and out. We're not doing any curb extensions because those are through lanes in the AM and PM because we're maintaining the parking. So we're doing a much more limited toolbox of options, and those would, leave the possibility for a future project depending on funding and other factors.
My second question is about that Jocelyn intersection, and I forget what the other one was, where a hawk signal is not planned, and instead it was increased signage. I know DDOT over the years has talked about the dangers of uncontrolled crosswalks, and it's clearly working to eliminate them. What would need to be done to give an impetus for a hawk signal at that intersection, or is that set in stone? Yeah.
So there are certain FHWA, the Federal Highway Administration, has certain standards that have to be met in order to introduce a hawk signal and a higher number of conflicting movements and pedestrian crossings. And as Laura mentioned, the numbers at Adamar and Kanawha were much lower than what we saw at Legation and Chesapeake. So, we have to comply with the federal requirements. We also don't have the funding, nor is it efficient to have a signalization at every single intersection. So as with other parts of the city, we kind of have to be strategic about where those go. And I completely understand that we all want to and can cross where, at any legal intersection. We're just trying to upgrade and focus some safety infrastructure at the most critical intersections. So, and we absolutely hear the concerns about removing crosswalk. It feels counterintuitive. I think our pedestrian team is going to, we're going to follow up with some additional information. We'll certainly take another look at it because we hear the concern, but we want to make sure that we are kind of coming up with the best proposal for what we've got out here.
Okay, and just to clarify, so at Legation, there are enough pedestrian crossings at Connecticut to.
I don't have the data in front of me, but Laura,
okay.
Can you speak? Was there significantly more pedestrians crossing there than at the others?
And particularly not in conjunction to Jocelyn and Harrison, where more minor improvements are being made. I'm just wondering what the difference are at those intersections.
Right. The
Laura, do you have
hierarchy.
that handy?
Yeah, the hierarchy of what isn't implemented depends on the volume of how many pedestrians are using it. And I know there could be more pedestrians using it if it's made safer. We get that. It's just that the guidelines and the federal requirements that we follow, do base it on the mostly on what currently occurs at those intersections.
Okay, Thank you.
Yep.
I had a question about the I forget what you called them, but the lane split barriers, or there was a term.
The
that was
slip
used.
lanes?
No, sorry. Like the little strips that were going down in the center lane, as like a tiny median,
Ce-
basically.
Center line hardly, like the,
Yes.
yeah, those,
Yeah.
yep.
So, is the intention with those to try to deter some of the like interblock U-turn traffic pattern that we see at times on Connecticut? Yeah, it's a pretty wide street, and if there aren't people actually parked on the block, it's relatively possible to, even in a large SUV, pull a Yui in the middle of the street. And I know at the zoo there was a quick install of some of the plastic beams, right, to preclude folks from pulling U-turns in the crosswalk there and nearby it. But in the upper part of Connecticut, where there are fewer signals, there are people who also do U-turns there, and I think some of those have caused more minor crashes, but nonetheless crashes of late. And so is that kind of the idea with those, is to preclude U-turns, or what's sort of the point of those?
Yeah, and again, I'll let Laura correct me. We want to get the cars to turn where they're supposed to turn and not kind of do a wide sweeping diagonal left turn. We want them to go so they can see the pedestrians in front of them and then make the left turn, as opposed to making the left turn through the intersection. Laura, did I get that right?
Perfectly, yes. And I'll add on that, yes, if we can make this apply for U-turns as well, that is another application to attempt to dissuade. We know that it's mountable, right? So, I mean, but the more we can put out there to be a visual cue for folks to maybe, pay better attention, and that's the goal, is the visibility and just the visual cue to slow down, and to make those turns in a more a less speedy way, for sure. Yep.
Okay, so
I
then
just want to
they would
amplify
continue.
something I saw in the chat. Sorry, someone else has not gone yet, but if I just wanted to amplify something I'm seeing in the chat about the hawk signals, which I've spoken about on these calls before, and the difficulty of, for people to understand. Like, my husband doesn't do it right. I was screaming at him in the car the other day. Is there something? Yeah, I mean, obviously the hawk light is the tool we have, and that's been used, and we don't have a lot of money to do other stuff. Is there better signage that can explain a hawk light? How, I feel like we've got to do hawk lights better. It's better than nothing, but it really is confusing.
Yeah, we've heard we've heard that. We've also heard people who, over time, like you,
Happy to have
know how
it.
to-
I mean,
know
it's
how to
not
use them,
even-
right?
yeah.
And I think that there is conversation about how do we change the signage to make sure that people fully understand and fully use them. So yes, we are looking at that, but again, we're also need to make sure that we are consistent with the FHWA requirements. But we hear that, and we recognize that there's still more education that we need to be doing. So yes, point
Around the
taken.
school, around merch. Ours on
Yeah.
Ellicott is really tough. Thanks.
And then there was somebody else who was trying to chime in. Who was it?
Oh,
Who's that?
I've been,
Oh.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Go
Tom.
ahead, Tom. Yeah.
Sorry, this is Tom Quinn, ANC3E04. I apologize, I cannot turn my camera on. I also cannot raise my hand. There seem to be some glitches with this call. I first want to just amplify a number of the comments about how disappointing it is that we got here. This is a process that began 6 years ago as an attempt to ameliorate, to fix, to mitigate the impacts of having a highway running through our neighborhood that serves Maryland commuters. We had a very public, very well attended, iterative process that during COVID saw a massive jump in meeting attendance. A lot of people supported Concept C, a lot of people supported remaking this highway into an avenue that's just getting these breadcrumbs. I realize it's not the problem of the DDOT staffers on this call. The mayor is nowhere near this. But I want to reiterate my disappointment about where we are. I want to, I had in my notes to talk about the hawk signals. We have 4 hawk signals in ANC 3E, and I don't think any of them are safe. I actually think they are less safe than having nothing at all. And I don't think signage is going to improve the hawk signals. We've gone from people stopping at the red lights at hawk signals and then proceeding when the lights go to flashing to just treating hawk signals as if they're flashing yellows and just flying through if they can get through swerving around pedestrians. I've had lots of animated arguments with George Brannion about this in the federal warrants, and I have to say I think it's BS. A hawk signal costs only $50,000 less, at least according to George, than a standard traffic signal. You know, for a department that has a $700 million budget that we are putting in hawk signals to save $100,000 to try to get around George's concerns that we're going to get audited by the Federal Department of Transportation, which has I think $100 billion a year budget on transportation, about $50,000 in our budget when it's a tiny percentage of DDOT's budget, is extremely frustrating to me. I wish DDOT would have some courage and would give us traffic signals instead of hawk signals that are standard. You know, I will add as an aside that Montgomery County's hawk signals use a completely different design and a completely different schematic than the DC hawk signals. So we have aggressive Maryland drivers who come into DC and are dealing with signals that are different than what they see at home. So I just really want to push back on this notion that we should be accepting hawk signals. I would love for the Department of Transportation to roll the dice and dare the Federal Department of Transportation to penalize us for not meeting the federal warrants. I would be stunned if the Federal Department of Transportation would come in and do an audit on a $50,000 overage on a traffic signal in the District of Columbia. Other thing I want to ask about that's not mentioned, that's a low cost thing that I think could help a little bit, is trying to tackle PUDO traffic. DC is just, DDOT and DC are just kind of flailing around, unable to respond to what COVID unleashed on our streets, which is the cancer of PUDO drivers everywhere. Now we have the additional element of these Venezuelan moped drivers just not operating according to any laws whatsoever on our streets. So one inexpensive thing that you could do that could make some of our commercial areas a little bit safer is to try to corral the PUDO drivers into safe spaces and manage those vehicular movements. And I didn't hear anything about that. So can you comment on why we're not talking about PUDO zones in our commercial areas, which might be a way to try to corral some of the behavior from some of these drivers? Is there a reason we're not talking about that?
Those are sort of operational improvements that absolutely can be looked at. But we were focusing on intersection related, where we're really seeing the largest number of crashes and safety concerns. So not that, you know, those pickup and drop off areas and other improvements can certainly be made. But we were focusing on where we would have the biggest safety benefit. Not to say that we can't do that. We certainly can, and happy to have that follow-up conversation on what might be a possibility. Yeah.
Okay, all right. It would be good to include that. I'm surprised that was not, because that was talked about when we were talking about the entire study was trying to manage pickups and drop-offs. So how would that not make it into these proposals when it's a relatively inexpensive, could be an inexpensive fix in some of these commercial areas? So I'm disappointed that wasn't included.
We'll take that back. That's, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got about 13 minutes left. I know we weren't respectful of your time at the beginning, but.
Well, if nobody else has questions, happy to go back. We got another one.
Okay.
So
I
part
just
of
want to follow
What's
up
that?
on the zoo carnage with the sticks that have been put up. The sticks that have been put up have like stopped a lot of the crazier behaviors and U-turns, including people going into the opposite lane to pass while other people were waiting to turn into the zoo. The issue is now people are making U-turns in the crosswalk at people. So if the sticks could extend through the crosswalk, and I've talked to Christian about this and sent photos and whatnot, And hopefully you all can get out here and just put the sticks up in the crosswalk to prevent the U-turns from happening there. That would be great. I think there's like, with anything that you do, there's like, cars are like water. They're just going to find another place to go unless you stop them from doing that. But that's a particularly like it when I'm waiting for the bus, it's very unnerving.
No, yeah, thank you for that.
Yep.
And then, was it Josh who was, somebody else said was gonna comment? Maybe I got the name wrong. James, maybe?
I think it was Josh, and sorry, Josh, if I cut you off. I just wanted to finish that or loop that thread back with the zoo thing and the sticks.
No, totally. Yes, it was me. And yeah, no worries, Janelle. Of course, that's an important topic to get to. I was just curious, right? Kind of, so the the decision to get rid of the concept C, which had the bike infrastructure, kind of DDOT previously. I know Sharon, you talked about kind of identifying the north-south alternative to Connecticut. So I just wanted to check in kind of on that and kind of see how efforts were going on that front.
Yeah, so that's, as I mentioned, the 5-year strategic bikeways plan is the effort that is going to be looking at citywide all of the routes, and that we don't have a scheduled meeting yet, but when we do, we will certainly share that. And there's a webpage. I don't know if somebody on the DDOT team can share that so that you all can stay updated, and we hope that you'll all be engaged in that process as well. So nothing more to share at this time. Ted, were there any questions in the comments that we hadn't addressed in one way or another?
Yeah, there's one, somebody asked about bicycle safety, and wondering if we could expand a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, we're limited in the toolbox, as I mentioned, because we are dealing with the existing conditions. But the safety improvements at the intersections will benefit all users. We certainly heard at the last meeting there was concern about having the parking, because that makes it less comfortable for the bikers during the rush hour period to be able to use that outside lane. So that will remain for this in this project. But I think that the safety upgrades will benefit all users. So the improvements that we'll be looking at for the intersections they will be modest. I want to be clear, right? We're not doing anything. This is not a major capital project, but they will benefit and make it safer for all users.
And then there's somebody flagged Cathedral Avenue as a intersection that we should look at adding a crosswalk. So that's certainly something that we will consider and follow up on. Going to keep going through. If any CAC members have additional comments or questions, feel free to jump in. We got another comment about Tilden being an intersection that we should look at, which we certainly will.
I had a couple of things that I could say. I wanted
Sure.
to say that one of the few things I heard tonight that I found heartening was the statement that if you had more money, you would do something about left turn lanes. And that is a reason for us, in my view, to push to give DDOT some more money, because left turn lanes would be a huge benefit for motor vehicle and pedestrian safety. So that was good news. Then the second thing that I wanted to say, which is picking up from something in the chat, and it sounds as though you are limited by certain federal rules, which I do not understand. But to me, a perfect example of the wrong-headed retrograde thinking that's guiding this is that puts motor vehicles first and pedestrians, the most vulnerable people, last. As you say, well, we're going by how many people cross a crosswalk to decide if we're going to upgrade it. But I mean, the most dangerous crosswalks are the ones people do not use. So that and someone said that in the chat. So what you're doing is you are ratifying the bullying nature of and danger of cars, and you are making pedestrians, the lowest of the low. And if that's what you're required to do, then that whole way of thinking, in my view, needs to be challenged and changed.
I second that. And I think, hearing from Courtney and Tom, who are also on this call in this committee, and also, commissioners for, this isn't their been a while here. I think all of us and all of our commissions throughout the years have constantly echoed like the importance of the vulnerable user over the cars, because that's just what we've heard from our community, from not just our residents who live here, the people who work here, but those people also care about the people who visit here. So that's the priority that we keep on reiterating over and over and over again, over hours long of meetings. And we're going to continue to do it. None of us are backing down on that priority. So I think it should be ranked by the priority should be on how many vulnerable users got hit and not how many crashes. Like,
Yep. Yeah, and to clarify, to restate, that's absolutely, we share that, right? That's the bread and butter of our work is, looking across all modes, increasing safety. And, I understand that there's lots of disappointment and other adjectives around how this project has gotten us to where we are today. But you have, I will say that across our agency, we share that focus on safety and for bikes and for pedestrians and for vulnerable users. And, that's what we do every day in and day out. There's a really dedicated team. We don't always get it right. We can't be everywhere. But we share that vision. That's in our Move DC goals. That's in our, in all of our prioritization. So, I can't change where we are, but I can tell you that is absolutely, a focus, and we're with you on we share that concern, and you'll see that in all of our work. And if you don't, please call us out on it. So
to that, if you just also add the fact of like where people have to cross Connecticut, where kids have to cross Connecticut to get to Merchdale, Jackson Reed, Hearst. I mean, like we've got to think about those crossers, your kids, my kids, we've already talked about on this, who just aren't, we have to think about them and how it's like, when you have a sidewalk, but people take the hypotenuse of the triangle and they just create a path of choice because it's a better path.
Desired path.
Thank you. I knew there was like a good urban planner terminology for this, but like the desired path, we've got to think about how kids are crossing Connecticut Avenue and figure out how we get them there safely. Because we did, Streets and Sidewalks did a count. We didn't do it on Connecticut. We did it on Reno a couple weeks ago, where we counted at 4 o'clock cars, how many cars were going through various intersections. And it was like, 95% Maryland cars. There were just, they were just getting through the neighborhood and to pick up their kids, right? It's understandable, right? To go from their work to their home. It's like how our city is set up because the transit isn't there. And that's a piece of this that we could all talk about. But, we just have to think about those kids who are in the way of people getting from their point A to their point B. And, with the distraction, it's just trouble always waiting to happen. And it's just so surprising every day that we haven't lost more pedestrians. But I just think you have to think first and foremost about those intersections around the schools and getting to those schools.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I'll just, one last comment on that, and I'm happy to send the link for all the federal guidance, but location of schools and proximity to senior centers and other vulnerable users, those are all factors that are also part of that calculation. So it's not just how many, there's a number of different factors, and happy to share that information. But I think we've covered all of the questions in the chat, and there probably are some comments that we didn't get to. Ted, do you want to talk about how are we going to post the slides on the website if folks want to follow up afterwards?
Yeah, we will post the slides on the on our website tomorrow. We'll also send them out to all the CAC members, so you'll have these in your inbox. And then as we move to having plans for individual intersections, we'll follow up starting with ANCs. So.
Okay, so thank you, everybody. You know how to reach us. Ted, our website will continue to have some of the higher level information, but as the projects move forward in advance, we'll be following our more limited approach to notify through the NOI process, as well as through the ANCs that are where the projects are located. And those of you that know our community engagement team, they're always available to be a resource and help direct you. And if anybody needs my contact information, you can reach out to Ted. He's got, I think we're all on the same thread, but if we're not, then Ted can share my information for the few follow-ups that we talked about. And thank you all for your thoughtful comments.
Who wanted a recording, how do they get that?
Well, that'll be on the website as well.
On the website, okay, thanks.
Okay. So thank you, everyone, and thank you for your, coming out and taking time out of your schedule. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.